So we've already made a short video about stacking needle gauges. Let's do the same treatment of stacking arc gauges. So let's select a new round arc gauge. So we'll take a look at this gauge, generic arc gauge, a nice big readout value in the center and a label, and we have a default set of spectrum values set up so that as the arc traverses, it changes colors in an appropriate way. You see also the gray background showing you the extent of the arc. So let's suppose we want to stack a couple of these. So what we're going to do when we stack an arc gauge is we're going to nest the arcs inside of one another. So let's first take this arc percentage of radius, and let's skinny this down a bit to give ourselves some room. Let's then go down to our label, and this is going to be the outer label. So we'll slide that down here a little bit to indicate that's going to go with the outer. So let's call this one outer. And then we're going to do the same thing we did with the needle gauge, which is once we have this gauge set up the way that we like it, we're going to hit duplicate. Okay, and then so we'll finish editing this top one, and now we have the inner one. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go down and we're going to turn off face visibility. We could also turn off scale visibility. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Let's go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back and show you something about that. Okay, so now what we have to do is this second gauge, as you can see, just has the arc and the numbers, and we're going to need to reduce the radius of this one. And so you see we create this inside. Now, since this arc width is a percentage of radius, we're going to have to bump that up slightly to get it to look the same. And then we're going to take our label position up, down. This is now the inner arc, and so we're going to slide that value up a bit for this will now become the inner arc. We're going to go down here and say that the ticks, which in this case are just the end of scale markers, we're going to go from a normal font to none. So we'll just leave the original 0 to 100 labels on there. We could turn that off too if we don't want them. And so now you can see that we've got these gauges stacked, but of course we also have to address the up-down position of the readout. So we'll drive this one down a little bit, and then we'll go back up here, we'll finish, we'll edit this one, and the readout position up, down. We'll move that one up a little bit. And then here we are with, finish that. We've got our outer arc, and we've got our inner arc with the two digital readout values. So that's how you stack the arc gauges. And you can see that within the constraints of space, and we might have to go to a smaller font size on the readout values in the center, we could stack a third or even a fourth one of these. In fact, the other thing we could do here is we can combine, and in fact, if you look at our example, the concentric example panel, you'll see that we've actually stacked a couple of needle gauges, and then in between them we created a gap where we stacked an arc gauge. So it's actually quite nice the way you could, in principle, combine the stacking of arc gauges and needle gauges. And the last thing I wanted to show you is you'll see that we have the gray scale behind the arc, showing where the arc's going to go on the outer, but we don't have it on the inner. And so if we go down here and we go to scale visibility, and we turn the scale visibility on, then that turns on, in the case of a round gauge, just that gray arc. There really isn't a scale per se like there is on a needle gauge. So we can leave those gray backgrounds on or off as a matter of preference. We can change the values of the spectrum coloring on the two gauges because we don't have any issue of max and min and an even number of ticks. So in a sense, it's easier to stack the arc gauges than it is to stack the needle gauges.